All right, let's get into a story from the Cold War that was literally erased from history for over 30 years. It's about a top-secret government mission, a suicide squad that was created for one single purpose, to assassinate a dictator. But that mission never actually happened. And the way it all ended, well, it's something nobody could have ever seen coming.
So that's the big question, right? How does a weapon that was built by a government to hit its worst enemy end up turning around and aiming right back at its own creators? The whole twisted story really kicks off in 1968, a year that just about pushed the Korean peninsula over the edge into another full-blown war.
Everything starts right here. It begins with this incredibly bold move by North Korea. An attack so daring and so close to actually working that it sent this wave of pure fury and panic through the South Korean government. And that fear, well, it set the stage for a really desperate and brutal kind of revenge.
Just try to picture this for a second. A team of 31 elite North Korean commandos. They're disguised in South Korean uniforms, they sneak through the mountains, dodge all the patrols, and they make it all the way to the heart of Seoul. They get to within 100 meters, that's less than a football field, from the Blue House, the president's home, before someone finally figures out who they are. The firefight that followed basically turned the capital city into a war zone.
You know, the goal of the mission was just so blunt, it was shocking. When they finally captured the only commando who survived, a guy named Kim Shin-jo, he didn't beat around the bush. He told them flat out, "I came to slit the throat of Park Chung-hee." This wasn't just some military strike. It was a deeply personal threat and a massive humiliation for the South.
So, the South Korean response wasn't just about hitting back. It was about symbolism. They wanted a perfect mirror image of the attack. North Korea sent 31 commandos to kill their president. Fine. South Korea would create its own unit of exactly 31 men to go and assassinate their leader, Kim Il-sung. And just like that, the secret plan known as Unit 684 was born.
So who do you even find for a mission that has almost zero chance of survival? For decades, a really popular movie called Seoul kind of created this heroic myth about who these guys were. But the truth, which only came out after official investigations, is actually way more disturbing.
Yeah, the reality was nothing like the movie. The men of Unit 684 weren't these hardened criminals taken from death row. They were just regular civilians, guys from the absolute margins of society. You know, petty thieves, shoeshine boys, unemployed kids who got into brawls. They weren't looking for redemption. They were just desperate for a job and a chance at a real future.
And the government, well, they made them an offer they just couldn't refuse. Imagine you're a drifter with a minor police record, and suddenly the state comes to you and offers you a clean slate, a ton of money, a secure job for life, and a chance to be a national hero. All you have to do? Survive one basically impossible mission. For these guys, it was the golden ticket.
But here's the really cold-blooded logic behind it all. These men were specifically chosen because nobody would miss them. They were considered disposable. They didn't have powerful families or connections who would start asking questions if they disappeared. So if the mission went south and they all died in North Korea, the government could just say, "We don't know who you're talking about." They never even filed official enlistment papers. They were ghosts from the very beginning.
So the recruits were shipped off to Seoul, this remote, empty island that pretty quickly turned into their own personal hell. For 3 years, they were brutally trained and forged into these elite killing machines. But while they were there, the whole world was changing, and the mission they were training for was about to become a huge problem for the government. They were, in effect, abandoned. And look at this. This is not your typical list of training accidents. 7 of the original 31 men died before the mission even got off the ground. And most of these weren't accidents at all. They were executed by their own trainers for things like trying to escape or just for talking back. The whole point was to make the training so brutal, so terrifying, that it would break them down completely.
Now, while these guys are suffering on this island, the political landscape is shifting. It's the beginning of détente. The US starts pulling troops out of Asia, and suddenly, North and South Korea are actually talking to each other for the first time in ages. In this new, warmer climate, sending a secret assassination squad into Pyongyang wasn't just risky anymore. It was a full-blown diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. So the mission was quietly canceled. This created a huge problem for the government. What do you do with 24 highly trained, traumatized killers who know one of your darkest state secrets? You can't exactly just send them home. So supplies to the island started getting cut. Their pay was withheld. And then, a truly terrifying rumor started to spread among the men. that the government was just going to kill them all to erase the evidence, and that fear, that's what lit the fuse.
Which brings us to the breaking point. On a single morning in August 1971, after 3 years of hellish abuse and now total betrayal, believing they were about to be executed, the men of Unit 684 decided to strike first, but their target, it wasn't in North Korea anymore.
The mutiny was unbelievably fast and incredibly brutal. The trainees turned the very skills they had been taught against their teachers. They hunted down and killed 18 of the 24 trainers on the island. The weapons the state had spent years creating were working perfectly. They were just pointing in the completely wrong direction. So after taking over the island, they make it to the mainland, they hijack a city bus, and they just start driving. But here's the strange part. They don't try to escape or hide. They drive straight for Seoul. Straight for the Blue House. So why? Why on earth would you head directly to the one place in the country you are guaranteed to be stopped? The answer, psychologists would say, lies in something called moral injury. See, the state, represented by the president, had made them a promise. It acted like a father figure, asking them to sacrifice everything for the nation. By betraying that promise, the government didn't just break a contract, it shattered a sacred trust. And in that moment, their true enemy was no longer the dictator in the north, but the very government that created them and then tried to throw them away. And as this bus is crashing through military checkpoints on its way to the capital, the government is in full-on panic mode. And their first instinct tells you everything you need to know. They announced on the radio that armed communist agents were attacking Seoul. It was an instant attempt to cover their tracks, to blame their old enemy for a monster they had made themselves.
The bus was eventually cornered in Seoul. Surrounded with nowhere to go, the men made one final horrible choice. They pulled the pins on their grenades. 20 of them died right there, in the firefight and the explosion. The 4 who were captured alive were tried in secret and executed a few months later. In the end, of the 31 men recruited for that patriotic mission, not a single one survived.
After the smoke cleared, the South Korean government did everything it possibly could to make the story of Unit 684 disappear. For more than 30 years, it was nothing more than a rumor, a ghost story buried under layers and layers of official denial. But the truth, as they say, has a funny way of clawing its way back into the light.
And it took an incredibly long time. The story was basically dead and buried until 2003, when that blockbuster movie Seoul came out and forced the entire country to confront this history. That led to an official government investigation, which confirmed the cover-up. And just think about this, only in 2024, more than 50 years after the event, did the government finally issue a formal apology.
And maybe the deepest tragedy of it all is right here, in the final words of one of the survivors, written just before he was executed. Even after being betrayed, lied to, and sentenced to death by his own country, he was still thinking about the mission. His biggest regret was failing the country that had failed him so completely. He was a patriot, twisted into a monster by the very nation he was trying to serve.
So, we end up right back where we started. The story of Unit 684 is this chilling lesson about what happens when a state starts treating human beings like disposable tools. It proves that the most dangerous weapon you can create isn't the one you aim at your enemy. It's the one you forge out of lies and betrayal, because eventually, it might just turn around and aim itself right back at you.